Welcome to the STR Data Lab.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the STR Data Lab. I'm Jamie Lane, Chief Economist at Airbnb, and I'm joined today with a guest, Rohin, a short-term rental investor, Twitter influencer, ex-influencer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Have you switched to calling it X, or do you still
I
call it
can't
Twitter?
really bring myself to do that. First of all, having like a popular Twitter account is like kind of embarrassing, so it doesn't come up that often. And then if you just start calling it like a singular letter like X, I think people get even more confused. So.
That's not how you introduce yourself at parties?
No, in the real world, I don't it's like a deep, dark secret. So.
That's funny. I have a lot of friends that follow me on LinkedIn. They're like, man, you're just like doing the things all the time. I'm like, that's just work. So love that you were able to join the podcast. I know we've been working together some on consulting, like here and there, sort of, right? Like, I feel like you're living the dream that I want to live. And maybe first question is just like, how do I replicate it?
Well, I can tell you what we did. I don't know if it's like replicable today, and I'd say like probably what gets you to where you want to be isn't the same thing that people started like 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, what we did is right now we have a small portfolio, 6 properties, all bootstrap, started with like not a ton of capital, and just sort of reinvested it. And yeah, we live in San Francisco. It started like 10 years ago. Could not afford a place in San Francisco, which like maybe what was our first choice. We were vaguely aware of like this Airbnb thing, but it was just like there was this like weird thing going on that like you could find places that were way nicer, like an hour away, and way cheaper. So like we were like going up to Sonoma for my wife's birthday. We rented a house, and I was like, I've always been one to like surf Redfin or Zillow, even when like I had $0 to do anything about it. And I was like, well, here's a house like for under $500,000. It's in Sonoma, which I know is like an expensive town. And it has a pool. It has like 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. And like, maybe we should just go look at this. Like, we'd never looked at a house in Sonoma. I'm not sure if we'd ever even looked at a house before. Maybe like one time in Tahoe, because that was where I was like originally thinking would be a good place to do this. And then we went up, like, we saw it on the way there. And at the end of the weekend, had a fun weekend. And we're like, should we like try to buy this house? And I was like, well, we could just put an offer in, see what happens. And, we can't really afford a place in San Francisco, but like we could afford this and we could split our time, or we could rent it out when we're not there. There's like a lot of flexibility. It's only an hour away. And like, we literally just rented a house for a boatload of money per night, like on VRBO or Airbnb. And like, I know this one isn't as nice, but it's like pretty nice. And I don't think there was like AirDNA then, and there wasn't like an easy way to guess this, but you could just like kind of tell. So yeah, so we just started with that, and like gradually, like in the beginning, it was like very much like fixing it up, us mostly using it, like Michelle, my wife's dad, flying in and like helping us like redo some tile and stuff like that, and it just started from one. So
And then assuming that first one went well.
yeah.
And then, so was that like a conscious decision of like, all right, like we did one, it's making us money. Like, let's just start doing more of it and like just figuring out markets to invest. Like, how did that
So this was like 2014 we bought it, and like 2015, maybe like a year later, it was like we're like, okay, like like this kind of, you could kind of see like there was some germination of this like working, but it wasn't like we were printing money. And I was like running a startup in San Francisco that like wasn't like going particularly well, but not particularly badly either. And like we were just busy doing other stuff, and we didn't have like a lot of money because we just bought this house. We fixed it up, and like that took like most of our money. So it was like on the side, but while we were doing other things, it was always in the back of my mind that this was the one entrepreneurial thing I had done that was like working. Where other stuff was like in various states of chaos. This was like sort of working, but it wasn't like printing money hand over fist. So it wasn't like, I had my eye in terms of like looking at stuff, but like I didn't have the money to pull the trigger on anything. And I didn't have the like super conviction. I was like, if I could get up to 5 with these, like, I would feel really great. But I have like no idea how I'm gonna get there.
So now that you're up to 6, is this your full-time job now? Is it cash flowing enough that you're able to not have to work? Like, it
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, so like, yeah, it was 5 years till we bought the next one. And then like, then I think I got a little more sophisticated. And like, that 5-year period, like I got a good sense of like on Zillow, like what's a good deal, what's a bad deal. But I still had no like financial sophistication about like, how do you refinance and then use the capital to buy a new property? Like I called our lender and I was like, can I refinance a property and, use that capital to buy another one? And they're like, no, you can't. And I was like, okay, I guess I can't. And I went like a year or two without even we're like, I guess you can't because one person told me no. And
Yeah.
then I like read more. I was like, wait a minute, what, you can do this, And so there was just like a very low level of sophistication, And I think things like online resources like Bigger Pockets or, podcasts, like they now like a lot of the language or, the questions to ask like are a little better known. So yeah, and then the next one was, like, a small place, but it was still kind of expensive because that was in Hawaii, and then after that, like, I don't know, I just tooled around more and, like, this, we found this, like, crazy earth ship for sale, and it was, like, under $300,000, it was beautiful, and that was, like, a little bit, it fell in our lap kinda, like, by divine intervention, I feel like, because then, like, I realized, like, okay, you can buy these smaller places without as much capital, and they're very capital efficient. People like them. You're not like making money hand over fist. But we weren't making money hand over fist either on the other ones. But like you don't need a ton of money to do this. And so then we were able to pick up like, a bunch of small ones, with low mortgages and, not high nightly rates, but high occupancy because they tend to be smaller. So
So so now it's I'm supporting you full time? Or
yeah, I mean, it sort of covers all our expenses. Like, basically like it worked out that like, okay, we built this portfolio and then by the end we could afford a place in San Francisco. Not because we were like so much, wealthier, but because the market crashed here. And then, yeah, it supports us full time. Like we work on it, but I'm always like scratching like, like, okay, this was the first stage in like, this like entrepreneurial journey is like building income that covers like your costs more or less. And then it's like, okay, well, what do you do next? Like, do you continue trying to do the exact same thing? Like what got you there? Or is like that path like gone for now, or like, or is you have to choose a slightly different path. So, but yeah, the goal was to get to 5, got slightly above it. And then that sort of got us to the goals that I had sort of set from this. But along the line, there was some idea of like, oh, I'd like to maybe I could get 1,000 or and 10,000 or which I sort of dismissed at some point. But yeah, I'd say like yeah, I think we did like reach for now, where we wanted to go. So, but what I'll say about this about the short term rental industry is like it gives you a sense that you shouldn't rest on your laurels because like no outcome is like deterministic. Like just because you have a set of properties where like your revenue and your minus your costs equals like a certain dollar, there's no guarantee that's going to stay stable. Like there's a pandemic hits, your revenue drops 90%. There's some legislation passes, like something else happens. Like weird stuff is always being thrown your way. Like a guest sees a spider and they write you a 1-star review, and then you get like bad bookings for like 3 months. So I don't think there's ever a sense that as an Airbnb host, you can just be like, okay, I'm all set now,
and I feel like that's really apparent with your properties. Like you got the lowest property I see is like a 485. And you guys are doing really well in terms of guest satisfaction. And 4.8s are really good. Like, is it a lot of work like to sort of keep guests happy? Like, how do you go about the operation side?
So it's my wife and I together, and I'd say it's like 90% of it. I think it's very people ask like how much work is running an Airbnb, and it's like 90% of the time it's like no work, and then 10% of the time it's like sheer terror because like there's a serious issue going on, like there's a leak or someone ran out of house because there's a pool and the pool is like like has a lot of pollen in it or whatever it is, and so the operations are not like so hard, like it's just random, like when things happen. And then yeah, I would say like it's not, not terribly bad. The other thing I'll say is like okay, we have 6 properties and they range from like 3 of them are like they are in like the 4.95 range. And then 3 of them are like around 4.85. But it's not like we're doing anything better or worse. Like we're the same host. Like we're probably like 3.89 on average, and that's like the level of host we are. But it's just like the properties are better. Like, like the ones that do super well, like our little cottage in Hawaii is awesome. And it has solely to do with being the property. Our Earthship is awesome. And it just has to do with the property. So it's way more fun running properties that are like 4.95 than 4.85. Because 4.85, you're kind of grinding to keep the guests happy versus, and it not being like a 4.7. So 4.95 in some ways, like they're just happy because the property is so cool. So.
Yeah, and I saw you were selling one of your properties. Like, is that sort of part of it? Of like, and it's a 485. It's maybe
Part of it is like, we listed one for sale, the 4.85 one. And part of it is just like the market there appreciated a ton. And like, you can just like take some chips off the table. But so far, I'd say like selling it hasn't like gone that well. Like we've gotten a few offers, but like none have been like super satisfactory that I'd be like willing to trade the cash flow from it versus like, the one-time gain from the sale. So yeah, it's been interesting, like selling a property because I sort of priced it like, okay, if we sold it, you're bringing forward like maybe like 8 years of free cash flow, and then you can use that to just like delever or reinvest in something. And it was very like financially driven. And then I think a lot of the buyers in the market today are like very much like sharks in the water. Like, there are buyers out there, but a lot of them are like really deal hunting. So it's an interesting point that like, like sellers are out there trying to like take a profit. And then there aren't that many buyers that are just like, in our experience here, that are just like, oh, I need to like find a way to make this work. The buyers are like either like super sophisticated or super bargain hunters or whatever it is. So it's kind of interesting to see that I'm like, oh, it's kind of an interesting time to be a buyer if you're willing to like take the risk, And I think a lot of people are scared, like just from like talking to people or talking to our agent, like the ones that it's probably the best fit for are like not necessarily like just willing to take risks the same way I am. I don't know. But
I,
yeah, like we have a listed for sale. We might end up keeping it, and that's totally fine too. Like it does really well. So
so, and you are in so many different markets, like from Asheville to Hawaii. Like, how have the properties been performing? Like, have you seen the market sort of evolve over the past few years?
I'd say like the interesting thing to me is like the ones of ours that do the best, like so when I say like things were like pretty stable until the pandemic, and then all of a sudden things like pretty much shot way up, like just in terms of a nightly rate. And like your costs didn't change a ton. The exception that was like Hawaii was just like closed for a year, so that didn't shoot up a ton. But even after when it reopened, then the nightly rates were considerably higher. So you had this like great thing where like things were kind of stable, and then all of a sudden like a lot of stuff happened, like related to pandemic, also related to like using dynamic pricing, related to like Airbnb, like just getting more popular. And so things went up. And now I think like our best properties that do the best are slowing down faster than the ones that like you would look at and be like, oh, these are just like in saturated markets or whatever, like our ones in like just there's no like cap on permits in like Mount Hood, Oregon or Yosemite or Asheville area, like we're outside Asheville. And so you would sort of think like, oh, these ones are probably like gonna be hit harder as like interest rates go up or if consumer spending goes down. But in some ways, like they're just like plugging along. And the ones that are slowing down are still like doing the best, but they are the ones that like, okay, you know what? People are like, I don't need to spend $900 a night on a one bedroom, like sort of like crazy overshoot of the last couple of years, sort of like evaporated on like our best properties. So they're still the best ones, like in terms of free cash flow or like doing absolute basis, but they're the ones that have like slowed down more.
So looking at the portfolio today, it might be each one is sort of doing relatively well compared to 2019, and the ones that were doing better have sort of slowed down. The ones that were doing worse
Yeah. I
have
mean, in
sort of
general,
maintained.
like in terms of our properties, the older we bought them, like the better they do. So that's like a hard and fast rule among ours. Like it's like either I've gotten worse at investing over time or just like there aren't as many good opportunities like over time. Like it's a more crowded market. But in some ways, like I think there's an interesting thing about real estate that like great markets overshoot in some ways. Like if you look at any big bubble, like say Florida real estate or Las Vegas real estate, in like 2008 or even like, I don't know, like around the Depression, like they had like massive overshoots and then like corrections, but it wasn't because they were bad. Like I don't know, like they seem like pretty good markets. In some ways, like they overshoot because they're good, and because like there's like a story like, oh, Florida's amazing, like I'm gonna invest in there, and then like there's a correction because it's like, is it $1,500 a night amazing? Like maybe not. It's like $900 a night amazing, which is still really good. So there's a correction, and like that's coming off a basis of like $400 a night in like 2019. So I think just like the evidence of a correction isn't like an evidence that it's a bad place. Like good places tend to have like overcrowding of investment in some ways.
Yeah. And something I love about short-term rentals just in general is, and in the contrast with hotels is like hotels, if you got a Hampton Inn, like there's like a ceiling on your rate of like you're never gonna get above like $250 a night. But it feels like there's no like inherent ceiling for any one property that
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
I feel like that's true, but I think like with our portfolio, which is mostly small properties, there is a bit of a ceiling, like that. Like people are, a small 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. Like there is like you don't have that super elasticity on like big weekends of like the way I think a 5 bedroom might. And you've probably seen that in your data that you know, like a 1 bedroom, like no, like people just won't spend more than like $300 say on a 1 bedroom that's normally 150. Whereas like a 5 bedroom that's normally 400 a night, like if it's Coachella, if it's like a big like concert or whatever it is, or 4th of July, like people will just spend what it is. Like I think that's my feeling is that like we sort of our prices tend to be like have a lower variability than other ones. And even our 3 bedroom has way big, that was our biggest place, has way more ability to like sometimes capture like higher rates than we normally get. So
no, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know the data that I'm gonna pull as soon as we get off the
I'm like
podcast.
very envious of my friends with like 7 bedroom homes. I'm not envious of running them because I know like what it entails, but I know like when the demand is there, like the people people will just pay whatever it is because they're splitting it so many different ways, or just like they're getting a lot of value or whatever it is. So
So you talked about pulling some chips off the table potentially, like, are you thinking about investing more? Like, I you're probably on Zillow is probably what, in the top 1% of Zillow users, like, are there any sort of markets that excite you of like, are you seeing any, like, good investment areas out there?
So I think like what's always interesting to me about real estate is like there's always good deals available, or like people always value things differently. So they like that creates like a lot of like opportunities and dislocations and whatnot. But the issue is that like if you use debt, everyone gets hit equally with like the 8% interest rate on investment properties or whatever it is. And that sort of neutralizes a little bit like this like interesting aspect of real estate that I might value a 1 bedroom this way, someone else might value it another way, and it's like fine. But we all are getting the same debt, and so that like makes it a little bit more challenging. Like I feel like the perception is like Airbnb or short-term rentals is very risky, but like when you are, when the interest rates were low and the prices weren't so high, like if you're not taking on an insurmountably large mortgage, like you should be able to like underwrite it. They're like, okay, if I got $0 in revenue or I had to do this or this and that, like how long could I make it last? And I feel like that's just harder to do. Like I'll find places like there was a place in Sedona I found, and like an agent sent it to me, and it was like has a pool, and it was awesome, and it was like around, Red Rock views, and it was around $1 million. And I'm like, oh, that is a good investment, like, but like, can I afford $1 million house? I can't really do that without like an enormous amount of risk. Like, what's the mortgage, taxes, insurance that you're just on the hook for?
Yeah.
At an 8% rate, it's like $7,000 a month, and that's like assuming there's no problem. So like, you have to look at yourself and be like, can I take this on? Like, if things go sideways, and for us, like it went sideways March 2020. It was like, your underwriting model needs to be like, oh, 90% drop could be that. Like our one in Hawaii was down for 1 year at like a 80% drop. And so, like for me, like there are opportunities, but you have to be very risk on in a way that I don't know if you had to be like a few years ago. So
Wanted to ask you this, and this feel like it's a perfect time. Do you have any like Zillow or Redfin like super user tips? Like what are the things that you're doing to like find good deals
um
or find
so
interesting
here's
properties?
like the essence of like what we did
Yeah.
is like so when you have young kids, there's always like a moment you put them down to bed and they're like crying or they're running out of the room and you're like, I just wish you would go to bed. So what I started doing was I would just like lay in the hallway in front of their bedroom and like surf like first I'd surf like the internet and then I just started surfing like Redfin or Zillow. And like what I would do is just like, it's somewhat of a fantasy. I'm like in this like terrible apartment in San Francisco on the floor and like my kids are running out of the room. But I'm like, oh, what if I had a house in Tahoe? And so I just like search, like search the location like every day for a long time. And then even if you don't have any money or don't have like know a lot about like short-term rentals or anything, but like what the prices are like. And then you understand like, okay, if it doesn't have parking and it's in Tahoe, it's gonna do, the price is gonna be really low. But here's one that does have like a garage, or 3 bedrooms sell for this much, but 5 bedrooms sell for way more. This one looks like kind of a three, but there's all these other rooms you can convert to bedrooms or things like that. And so you sort of start to just like see like what is the fair market price, and then like what are things that you could value differently. Like a property in Hawaii, it is a 1 bedroom, and it was on the market for like 2 years, and like I just sort of like watched it. Like in those days, like this is 2019, like properties in vacation areas didn't sell quick. Like someone had to be randomly going on a vacation in Kauai and they're like, oh, maybe I should go look at a house. And like, how often does that convert? It was like zero. Like, so like you just like sit around and watch them and then like wait for, if a price changes. And so I think there's something to just like, that's something everyone can do is just like, even in the most overheated market, even if you have no money, is just like pick a location and just like, you'll probably find it fun. I find it fun. It's just like look at it every day. And then, don't get too excited if you see a good deal unless it's like sitting around for a while. And then even still, like you're sort of like shopping in the barrel of apples that are all like bruised up. And most of them are like, bruised because they have a worm in them. But like some of them might be like, oh, you know what, this is a superficial bruise. And like as someone without a lot of money, like I should like hunt here versus competing with like people with a lot of money. So yeah, study the market and then like kind of don't get excited over hot deals. Get like, just like drag yourself through the sludge and like find something that's like in there by accident. So
Yeah. Maybe talking a little about Twitter now, you've got like 89,000 followers. That's unbelievable. Like, and you've talked a little bit. I feel like you're sharing a whole lot more, just like single family homes, like
yeah.
potential investment properties. Like, are you thinking about and monetizing that Twitter following? Are you monetizing it now? Like, and how do you think about maybe leveraging that in the future?
I mean, for me, like, so I've always been like on Redfin, on Zillow, like saving all these houses. And like I'm saving like hundreds of houses, like before I'm even on Twitter or anything like that. And I'm just like, one out of these 100, there's gonna be a price drop. Or there's gonna be some issue, something comes up, and like one out of these 100, I can take a crack at it in some ways. Then I realized like one day I was like, I'm just like hoarding all these like interesting houses, and I'm probably not gonna buy them. Like, it's just like, like I should just post them and maybe other people will buy them or other people will be interested. And so, I always like spoke a lot on Twitter just about our portfolio short-term rentals and what we were doing, but I was like getting a little bored of it because like it's been hard to acquire any new places and the little cabins we bought, like they just don't exist at that price point anymore. So I was like, it's getting really boring to talk about like the operations all the time of like a guest has a good experience and then they give you a 4-star review, and like you're upset. But you can only like say that so many times. So I was like, what are my other like assets I'd like to talk about? And I was like, oh, here's some interesting houses. Like, am I gonna buy this house in Yosemite that's 750,000 and it has a pool and it's like big? Like, I mean, I guess I could like pull together like lots of money and take on risk and like do this, but like I don't know, I can just post it and I don't have to do anything. And it doesn't have to be a good investment, or maybe it is, but it's on someone else to figure it out. So I started just like posting all that stuff. Or just like, in San Francisco where I live, like, when we bought a place, it took like 10 years basically of me like surfing every day to like understand the prices till I found a price anomaly. So I was like, well, now I have a home here, and I'm like, I don't need another one. So I'll just like post ones there, and like, so it's sort of been leveraging like the stuff I was already doing, which is like a good like process for like finding interesting houses, and then yeah, and then in terms of monetizing, I haven't been monetizing it yet, but it's like people are like sometimes buying the houses I post, or they're like trying to find real estate agents from what like they're like, oh well, I want to put an offer in here, and I don't have an agent, and so I'm like, okay, well, I don't think the world is going to evolve such that you can post a house on Twitter or Instagram or wherever, and there's a buy now button. But I think there is like that can be like the top of the funnel of something I want to try. Is like, okay, you want to buy a house in Yosemite? Well, here's an interesting house I posted. If you want to put an offer in, I'll connect you with a buyer agent, a listing agent. If you need some help with like how to underwrite it, I can give you like a quick some quick eye set of eyeballs. And so that's what I'm like moving towards a little bit is like, how can you get inside like a transaction? And so part of that is just getting licensed in California and, taking the exam for that next month and like, and then I can actually start helping people legally. So,
Something I just heard that Expedia launched is called their travel shops. I don't know if you heard
okay.
this.
Yeah.
It's like curated travel experiences by influencers that you can post like to your social media following and then earn commission if people actually book it. So
Interesting.
it's like kind of like the same thing, but like
Yeah.
instead of the homes for sale, the homes that you should stay in, like that could be an
Yeah.
yeah.
And I don't know how it'll work out, like Twitter is like a very diffuse environment. Like you post something and it's sort of like post it like throwing like a paper airplane in like a tornado, and like who knows if anyone's gonna. It's probably not gonna reach anyone, but it reaches somewhere unpredictable. And so part of it is like I can't really try this idea until like you have all the legal stuff in place. But like that's sort of like what I'm moving towards is like, okay, I don't know, is this investment I really want to buy? Like I have to do all the work, I have to take all my money and like reinvest it. I was like, maybe someone else will want to buy this. And like if I get a commission on it, that's great. If not, like it's like super entertaining stuff. So
Yeah. And get
yeah, I'm
paid for
definitely
something
like,
you're already wanting to do.
yeah, I'm already doing this anyway. So I'm like, okay, when you have a portfolio property, it's like you have to like you're like a mini capital allocator. You're like, okay, I need to put a pool in here, a hot tub here, I'll get that. And I'm like, well, what do I have to like fix up the most of my properties? Like one is just like the social media property I have is like it's just like a barren, unmonetized like parking lot that no one parks in. So like I should probably like see how to develop that versus like retiling our pool in Sonoma or something. So
And to that point, you and I say famously, but probably only a few people remember this, but you went through and like added hot tubs to all your properties, like
yeah, and I think a part of that was like in a lot of the markets we did that, there was a big slowdown of some of our competitors. And like by doing that, like we were able to just like stay 80, 90% occupied. And like we didn't get like some of them we got like a bit of a rate increase, but I'd say like we were able to keep our pandemic rates in some of these and keep our occupancy, whereas a lot of our competitors have like drop their occupancy a lot. And so it's not uncommon, like, I'm in the analytics and like we're doing like 85% occupancy in like an off season, and our competitors are doing like 30, 40%. So it wasn't like a big off. Some of that, it was like a big offensive, like got more money from it. But some of it was like, okay, well, this turned out to be like very fairly defensive, but like you are taking on a big pain in the butt of like maintenance and stuff like that. So
so I assume you still think it was a good decision.
you have a way of convincing yourself whatever you do was a good decision. So I like to think, yeah, like our occupancy would be way lower. And certainly like when we use the properties, it's like way more fun. And then you get a little bit more of that price elasticity and peak demand if you have a hot tub. Like people are willing to stretch a little bit to like get a small 2-bedroom with a hot tub, and they might spend $300 a night. But on the off season, we were getting like 149 a night, and you're like have all the hot tub maintenance expense and like all this stuff. And so it's not like people are stretching then, but I think you do get like a little bit higher prices like because of that. So in the peak season. So
You sort of mentioned at the beginning that and sometimes it's like almost no work. Like, what is your philosophy on revenue management? Are you like looking at the data? Are you actively managing rates? Do you and just sort
yeah,
of do the
I'm probably in
seasons?
there like once a week. And I think like you have to be on top of it because like if you just like set it and forget it, at least my experience is like the market changes so much. A good example, like 2021, I think we first started using revenue management, and like there was some vacancy in Sonoma in August, and I was just like, oh, I know this will, we're in the beginning of August, and I know this will book. Or maybe this was 2022, like whatever it was, but it was just like a little bit of cockiness that like, oh, I can book, it's at 775. If I drop it to 675, it'll book. But then like the next year, you sort of think it's going to happen, or maybe the analytics think it's going to happen like that, but it's not like working out that way. That like people aren't like, so people are going to Europe instead, or there's some like big change. And so you can kind of, and I think this happened to us a little bit, but I know it happened to a lot of people in this area, is that you get a little flat footed because there's this big, systemic change in demand for this area, and you're still reacting like it's going to like book last minute. And when in reality, you needed to lower your prices in May or in June, like 2 months in advance, and you need to lower it to like, not to like 675, but to like 458. And so then like, I think then we saw like way more vacancy during like peak season from overpricing. If you're not like on top of it and like being like, we're just not seeing this year as many last minute bookings as we were before. So like we have to like be a little bit more aggressive about cutting the rates early. And so, yeah, so I'm on top of it maybe like once a week. But I think you can't be like too on top of it. I don't know, like there's no harm in like always looking at it, unless you like convince yourself to cut rates too early.
So, maybe pivoting to another topic,
Sure.
because I know you're sort of on the socials often, and there can be so much negativity about short-term rentals. Like, it feels like every negative post sort of has that high potential to go viral. Do you have any sort of thoughts on, like, why that is? Like, is there just something about, how much people hate short-term rentals that, anything negative just, like, really sticks with them?
There's only like two narrative structures in like media, and one is like building something up, like, oh, this is great, like, this is Theranos, like when, the founder's on the cover. And then the other narrative structure is like tearing it down, which is like Theranos posts like, all the scandals. And so it's like, where like investors are always going to be on the tear it down side of the narrative structure. So it's just like reality of it, like people guess like love staying at short-term rentals, but then like because it's like you stay in a hotel with your whole family, and it's just like you're not sleeping that well. You wake up early and you're like making coffee in the bathroom because you don't want to like wake everyone up. And so it's just like a good product for people. But like, are people going to go on social media and praise like the cleaning fee? Like it's just like they're not going to. So any sort of structure, any sort of media thing has to fall under like one or the other. So like hey, I'm sure there were some positive articles like in 2008 about someone who like covered their mortgage using Airbnb, and that was a short-lived honeymoon of, building it up as being a cool thing. And then like, then you just enter a new cycle, so.
Yeah. And are there things that you think the media gets, like, correct or sort of broadly wrong about short-term rentals?
I mean, the one thing that like is proved over and over again is like in these sort of fancy vacation areas, when you ban short-term rentals, I think it does lower the prices considerably, but it lowers it such that like a second home buyer just like buys it. They're like, oh, this house used to be 1.2 and now it's 800,000 for a house in like Napa Valley or Tahoe or whatever. It's like, this is like dirt cheap for me. My company just IPO'd. But like this $800,000 house is like is like enormous mortgage. Like, so it doesn't like drop down to the point where like the local W-2 wages in the area like can afford it. So
Mhm.
like I think the media gets the point wrong that like you can ban Airbnbs to local affordability. Like you'd have to sort of like, it doesn't like lower the price enough of that because like a retiree might buy their dream house or a second homeowner might. So that's one thing. And then I think the best data point of that is like South Lake Tahoe, California, like I think 2018, 19, like kind of a while back, they basically had an Armageddon, like all short-term rentals gone except outside this little corridor. And like, looking back at it today now, like just 40% of the homes there are now vacant. And like by vacant, like it just means like someone in San Francisco or Marin just like bought a house and they use it occasionally. And Like that's just what happens like in markets where there's a dislocation between the housing price and like how much employers pay. And then like Airbnbs might like sort of set the top of the market because then like you can have a house and you can rent it out and you can pay a bit more. But in the middle of it is just like retirees or second homeowners that like end up buying most of the properties, I think. So they have to try different things than just banning Airbnbs if they want to make it like affordable for people who live there and work there, you know. So
Yeah, so and the in game or the result of that is a second homeowner from San Francisco now owns the house. Tourists aren't coming. There's not any local money being spent,
yeah.
and it could be and probably is hurting that local W-2 worker, and that they're not able to their job might not be supported because now tourism's curtailed in that market.
Yeah, I mean, and like I don't know, like I mean, it's probably a very tricky, like economic thing to like, sort of model, but I don't think it's like unreasonable for places to regulate or even ban Airbnb. Like they sort of it's like their community, but I think like it doesn't work to create affordability unless you do other stuff too. So like whether it's like deeded areas that like only people who work there can buy this place, then you're all of a sudden like really creating like you're start taking out all the competition that is like driving prices beyond what it is. But like some places try that, like in Vail, they like you have to work for the Eagle County to buy this place, and it's still like a one bedroom for like 800 grand or like this high amount. Like so you just get people like whose parents are rich, buying it for them. Or there's a lot of game in the system. So maybe like you just have to like come up with ways that the local wages are like way higher. And I don't know how do you like make an economy like that, but like that probably like goes a lot of the way. And then like sort of realizing that like there's a second tier of buyers after the Airbnb buyers that are just like gonna leave it empty most of the time. And how do you like that level of competition is going to be there in most scenarios. So
Yeah, I was just in Banff for a conference, and they had a regulation where you have to be a local worker to buy a house in
interesting.
the town. Like,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I think that like might like if places are really serious about like creating affordability for people who live there, then I think that's like a better thing to almost consider than just banning Airbnb. Like or but if they just want to be like a town like that's taken over by the interests of like people who don't work there but have property there, that's what happens when you just ban Airbnb. But I suspect that doing something like Banff like might actually. I mean, I don't know how much that's been tried in the U.S., but it could actually like get you like closer to what they're talking about wanting to do. So
yeah. And also still, I stayed in a Airbnb while I was there, and it was in someone's upstairs apartment. Like they allow ADUs, they allow sort of
yeah,
anything,
I
but
think that's.
like,
I mean, I
yeah.
think that's pretty. Most places will still allow that. Like our property manager and house cleaner in Sonoma, like she was able from her earnings as like basically a house cleaner, but also like a property manager, was able to buy a house in like Glen Ellen, which is a town of Sonoma. And like you can't do Airbnb there, but I'm like begging her as like, Kathy, you gotta like take your garage and turn that into a guest suite because that will like cover all your mortgage. And almost every town in Sonoma or anywhere will allow you to do that. And it's just like people don't necessarily always want to do that, but like if I were living in an area and somehow I'd managed to like buy a house there, like I would, definitely consider something like that. Like I tell my neighbors in all these places, like if they're handing out permits, just get one. Like in Sonoma, like there were in this area we're in, they used to hand out permits all the time. I tell like my pool cleaner who had a house nearby, like, get the permit. Like our neighbor, just get the permit. You don't have to use it. And then they stopped giving them out. And I'm like, well, just like configure your house, like in a way to like have a guest suite. And you can sort of like that's like what the local governments want when they want Airbnb is like a guest suite that like, isn't taking a unit off the market and also is like contributing money to like people who live there locally. So I feel like that sort of stuff will be very safe, but it's people aren't really like always like willing to go for it. But I try to convince people to do it.
Yeah. No, and there can be so much opportunity in the space that part of the reasons why I still just love it so much is and my parents do it in retirement. They've got 4 properties now that they sort of own, manage, and then doing the art gallery in one of the spaces, like they're making more in retirement than they were when they work their full-time W-2s. Like
Mhm.
it's crazy. And
Yeah.
they're having
I mean,
way
yeah,
more
that's
fun.
like real the cool thing about it, you know?
Yeah.
No.
So maybe getting to some of the final questions. We've got Airbnb, Verbo, Booking, like, and the big OTAs out there sort of promoting the space. There's a big book direct movement that's also happening. Where do you see, and do you have any sort of thoughts on sort of the future of like the influence of Airbnb, Verbo versus and people just running their businesses, not having to need Airbnb to rent out the homes? Like, how do you guys think about it?
As someone that like has properties just like spread out all over, like I don't really think about direct booking at all. Like, am I gonna like build a marketing channel like to like rent my like $200 a night cabin in the middle of nowhere? Like, it's like a lot of effort. You have to like take and price out like that effort of doing that. So I'm like very glad to like pay the OTAs and like Verbo and Airbnb. I'll say that like there's a couple scenarios where it might make sense to sort of be off of them. Is like one, if you have like a decent number of properties in a given location, then all of a sudden the like calculus of like, okay, I need to spend like 10 hours a week like doing direct bookings, but like if someone comes to me and I'm full at this house, I have another house or whatever it is, then like that's a different thing. So if you have like some scale, and that oftentimes means just like a property manager, that's great. And then the other thing is I think like if you have like a business that's like you think of it more of like a saleable asset than the real estate, then there's some value in every property management company. They're like, oh, we get 40% of our bookings, but it's like, nah, are you really getting that? Like, you would have gotten them anyways, or you've like cherry picked them from Airbnb and Verbo and like had them come to your site directly through some weird way. But I think that makes your business more valuable if you go to sell it, to be able to sort of say that. And then if it's true, that's even better. But I think there's something that like, businesses don't get valued. Like the quality of their earnings is like takes a hit if it's all like from one channel like Airbnb. Whereas the value of the real estate doesn't really matter. So if you're just thinking about like I'm a real estate person, like it doesn't really matter what the channel that it's coming from or not. But if you're like selling a property management firm or you have like a glamping setup, there's a lot more value of like having this Instagram account or whatever it is. So yeah, personally, I'm like, oh, it seems like a waste of time. Like if I'm getting like an ad for like an Airbnb in like this like in Norway, like, and this person seems like they have one Airbnb. Like, is that like a economic use of their resources? I don't think so. But like, is it if you had like a lot of properties, then it might be. So, what do you think?
I tend to agree with you. Like, cost benefit analysis, it's like you've got all the time and effort and expense of building a direct booking website to save essentially on the commission of Airbnb. Like, then are you going to give a discount if someone books direct? So that's even lowering that sort of delta. So now it's all right. What is that time and expense of maintaining it? And then what is that and I'm gonna save on that commission and then the need to then drive traffic and whether it's through marketing campaigns and Google AdWords, like all these like for most people, it's probably not gonna be economically beneficial to do it, and it's gonna be a whole lot of additional work.
And then I think the only way you sort of amortize that cost is essentially then being a property manager because you're like, well, I had 5 properties, but I've gotten very good at getting direct bookings. How do I get other people bookings too? And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I guess I have to just manage other people's property, So
Yeah, and
it's
that
kind of running
becomes
a lot of properties for it to make sense. So
yeah, and that becomes something you can sell to the guests or to the or homeowners, right? Of like, we're gonna be able to generate this amount of cash flow from direct bookings, and that's what you get as an asset for listing with me.
yeah.
Yeah. So Instagram,
Yeah.
TikTok, like, are you gonna be on those? Are you already on those?
I'm not really on anything except Twitter because I'm not like, oh, I want to like have a large presence.
Yeah.
I just like finding houses and posting them. And like, if I had to do something where it was like, oh, I have to make a whole video and do, spend all this time, I probably wouldn't do it. Like, people always like, oh, Twitter, like you barely get any money or you like don't get this or that, but it's like, you don't have to do much to like post a little tweet. It's like 30 seconds of work.
Yeah.
So that's like one thing. It's like, the other thing is just like, okay, if I want to figure out how to like build a business around that, I should just sort of focus on like, oh, can you actually like help people buy a house or connect them with an agent or have them put an offer in? Like, can you do it one time? And then can you do it like 5 times? And then like, once you have something replicable, then you think like, oh, I should just like be on more channels because it like adds more people there. So as someone who's like started like a decent number of businesses before, I found that it's always been a mistake to build like huge distribution with nothing to sell. Like you just sort of, it's better to like, oh, sell something first and then you figure out the distribution after the fact, like, or simultaneously. So I don't really like feel the need at the moment to like get on other stuff. But if it was like advantageous to a future business, then I totally would. So,
No, that makes sense. Well, Rowan, where can people follow you? And anything else you want to sort of leave the audience with?
yeah, I mean, you can just find me on Twitter at my name, Rohin Dar. And then, yeah, that's definitely the best way to connect and like really my only major presence. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining the show. It was great talking.
yeah,
And
great talking to you too.
yeah, see you around.
All right, take care.